Hello and welcome to the Society with Fatma Shaheen at PTV World. Today on our show, we'll be talking about an extremely important topic. We'll be talking about prisons as they do exist in Pakistan. In this regard, we'll not only be talking about the complex realities of the same, but overall why is it so important then to work towards a necessary reform. In this regard, we will be delving upon the fact that, we do appreciate the fact that prisons currently are faced with not one, rather quite a few problems. Be it issues relating to overcrowding, be it issues relating to prisoner rights, be it issues relating to the system overall. When we do talk about the more vulnerable groups, more particularly women prisoners, juvenile offenders, even for that matter, transgender inmates, so to speak, what is very important then to sit back and analyze is that do such marginalized groups get their right to legal representation? And in the event that they do, is it quality representation that they are getting, so as to give them a favorable outcome? That is also something upon which we'll be shedding light to. We'll be talking about the initiatives taken by the government, whether it is in the form of, overall improving, the prison menu, or for that matter, making that transition towards solar energy, and how are initiatives like these actually impacting the daily lives of prisoners, so to speak. Last but not the least, we'll be talking about the need for there to be not only necessary policy and a legislative reform, but overall a shift towards perhaps focusing towards having a more rehabilitative system in place as opposed to having a merely punitive one. All of this today, that too with an extremely pertinent panel. Let me introduce you to my today's panel. My first panelist for today's show is Dr. Qadir Alam Saab. He's the currently AIG Prisons Punjab, and he's also an academic visitor at Oxford University, alongside being currently a member of the committee made by the Chief Justice of Pakistan on prison reform in Punjab. Assalamu alaikum, sir, and welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us. Alongside him, I have Dr. Syed Tansheet Mustafa, who is a consultant psychiatrist. Assalamu alaikum, sir, and welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us. My third panelist for today's show is Ms. Ayesha Saleem. She's an advocate of High Court, a legal expert too. Assalamu alaikum, ji, and welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us, Ayesha. And via telephone line, we'll be joined by Ms. Belal, who is the executive director of JPP Pakistan. Assalamu alaikum, ji, and welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us. Now, before we start the discussion on today's topic, let's have a look at this brief report.
Pakistan is making strides towards a more human and rehabilitative prison system. Efforts to improve living conditions and reduce overcrowding are gaining momentum, ensuring inmates are treated with dignity. Rehabilitation programs are expanding, with vocational training and mental health initiatives helping prisoners reintegrate into society as productive citizens. Legal reforms are being prioritized to reduce under-trial detentions and ensure speedy justice for all. Special attention is being given to vulnerable groups, including women, juveniles, and transgender inmates, to provide better health care, legal aid, and reintegration support. With policy reforms and growing community involvement, Pakistan is on the path to transforming its prisons from places of confinement to centers of rehabilitation and positive change.
Welcome back from the report. Sir, I would like to start the conversation with you. They say that no one truly knows a nation until one has been to its very jails. Given this, how would you overall comment on the evolution of Pakistani prisons? And do you feel that at a very basic level, we have been able to evolve so as to meet, various international standards? What are the issues we are facing, and what are the strides that we have made?
Pakistan inherited prison system from British colonial regime in India.
Right, sir.
And as we know, 1894 is the Prison Act that's still in vogue in Punjab and also in other provinces of Pakistan. This act was the brainchild of Lord Macaulay. And because he was highly impressed by the codification of different penal laws, and which also include the police laws and the Indian Penal Code. But at the same time, we have another idea, which is the structure of the prisons, which we have at the moment. That was the idea of Jeremy Bentham, and the emphasis was on the security and the vigilance at that time.
Right, sir.
So, with the passage of time, after the independence, we have not made any significant change in these two laws, especially 1894 Act and the Prisoners Act 1900 that deals the affairs of the prisons in Punjab.
So all these old, outdated laws, they are still governing us, sir. Sir, I would want you to talk about that. But when we do talk about, sir, the basic evolution in terms of the initiatives that the government has taken, those have appeared to be at least promising in this regard. We have seen the Chief Minister actually focus upon improving conditions for inmates, more particularly for female prisoners. So do you not feel that when it comes to the government doing what it has to do, we have made positive strides in that regard as well? For example, there has now been focus placed so as to overall improve the dietary menus of prisoners, and this is something which was perhaps unheard of before, and overall to transition towards solar energy too.
In government institutions, the law plays very important role. Rather, it is a driving force to run any government institutions. Pakistan has to change its penal law, especially the prison laws, due to two compulsions. The one is that is the international treaty obligations. The Pakistan has ratified International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and since 2010, and under that covenant, we have the United Nations Standard Minimum Rules for the treatment of prisoners. So we have to change our laws to make in conformity with the dictates of United Nations Standard Minimum Rules for the treatment of prisoners, the Bangkok rules and the Beijing rules. They are dealing with the juvenile. So in this case, the government has taken an initiative and they constituted a committee, and we have identified those rules which are contradictory to the international guideline and the basic the rights of the prisoners. So those identified rules are being amended and soon be presented before the legislative committee of
and other than that, we have seen that this stress has been placed overall to improve the living conditions of prisons too. Right, sir, I'll come to you, but before that, Ms. Sara, I would want you to comment on this further. So when we do talk about various challenges that are faced in prisons particularly, we come across the fact that overcrowding for one would be the most pervasive and most pertinent one in this regard. So as a lawyer who's worked so diligently generally on prison systems and prison reforms in Pakistan, how do you propose can we get past these issues? How do you propose can we then at least aim to make imprisonment a matter of last resort rather than automatically going towards it, and to the extent of those who do commit minor offences, preferably prefer them to serve community services as opposed to them being put into jails? So how would you comment on this particular issue?
Pakistan's jails are overcrowded, largely due to the overuse of under-trial detention, with nearly 75% of prisoners held for years because of slow judicial processes, rigid bail laws, and an over-reliance on punitive measures. Imprisonment has become an almost automatic response rather than a measure of last resort. And this is a trend that contradicts the Tokyo, Beijing, and Bangkok rules and the UN minimum standards on the treatment of prisoners. These frameworks emphasize that pretrial detention should only be used when absolutely necessary and replaced with non-custodial measures whenever possible. A gender-sensitive approach is also essential. The Bangkok rules call for the use of non-custodial measures for female offenders, especially mothers, primary caregivers, etc. So currently, there's about 161 women in Pakistan's jails who are detained under circumstances that force their minor children to live behind bars with them. So for such categories of prisoners and women, community-based sentencing alternatives for these groups would not only meet international standards, but they'd also help ease our overcrowding crisis.
And not only that, we must then consider issues of, for that matter, options like electronic monitoring or even house arrest. And this is something that we do see happening in other parts of the world. Dr. Saab, I'll come towards you and I would want you to add to this further, but more from your own mental health care professional as a perspective. Now, we do see that when we do talk about rights of prisoners, what is very important is to also give them a healthy environment, healthy living conditions too. Now, a lot of times we might come across people who might be very high risk and dangerous offenders, that they do need to be put behind bars for reasons more than one. But at the same time, there is also this philosophy which says that if you end up putting in people in jails, then perhaps the risk of them reoffending that increases, and that might push them into further anxiety or further depression. So how do you as a psychiatrist propose can we have that ideal balance where we do protect such high risk offenders from harming the public at large by putting them behind bars, but at the same time do it in a manner that it doesn't harden them in turn?
The important part is to assess people's needs holistically. There is a growing evidence in the world that the mental health needs of the patients should be prioritized in prison and in forensic or in restrictive settings. Least restrictive options are preferable all around the world. And I think so the role of prison is rehabilitation, getting them back into the society, integrating them with the society and working on any of their personal deficiencies, mental health needs, so they can become a productive part of the society. Again, if their needs are not met, if the holistic approach is not met, and if they are in overcrowded places, they are much more vulnerable to be exploited. And again, there would be no opportunity for them to engage in any rehabilitation work.
Right, and they're also more prone to self-inflicting harm upon themselves. We see so many suicides happening in prisons. But when we talk about mental health, I think what is very important to touch in this regard is also mental health of the prison staff and also perhaps of mental health care professionals like yourself. So how do you propose can we go about tackling this as a generic issue with regards to prisons, and one which is just not then confined towards the prison population per se?
I think so. Prison officers like Dr. Saab, again, they work in a highly charged, highly challenging environment where they have to put their life at risk and they have to interact with them. And prison officers do a very good job working in a very compassionate way. But first thing is acknowledging that they work, and people to acknowledge and develop insight that I work in a very challenging and emotionally draining environment. And then there should be avenues where their emotional and mental health needs are looked after. I think so there is, if the best, the growing evidence, there is a huge amount of evidence in these extremely challenging environment and extremely stressful environment. Peer support networks are really important.
Those are extremely important.
Again,
Right,
if all the prison officers get together rather than focusing on prisoners or their clients and things like that, if they are able to focus on themselves, reflect on how it has emotionally affected them, and if they have a safe, non-judgmental environment where they can interact with each other, learn from each other and support each other.
That will definitely be extremely supportive for them. And also in this regard, not to forget the requisite education, vocational training programs, because then they would have healthy outcomes with regards to tackling their mental health issues too. I'll come towards you, Ms. Ayesha, and I would want you to add to this. So we are talking about the status of prisons as they do exist in Pakistan. And in this regard, then we also appreciate the fact that when it comes to under trial prisoners, approximately 73% of the total prison population then is deemed to be one which unfortunately is deprived from their right to legal representation. And this, as you know, a lawyer, you would agree with me on this when I say that this is an extremely important thing, because a lot of times people end up spending their entire lives in jails just at the end to find out that, you know, they were completely innocent. So when it comes to tackling this issue, to what extent do you feel has the system been able to do just that? And here we are just not talking about then the urban prisons, we are also talking about prisons which do exist in the rural areas too. So how do you look at all these issues from the viewpoint of a lawyer?
So like you said, our prison population is predominantly nearly 75%. It's comprised of people that are still undergoing their trials, which means that they have the right to the presumption of their innocence. But unfortunately, in Pakistan, due to several factors, these people cannot take benefit of a certain set of rights that an accused person, a person that has not been proven guilty, is entitled to. For example, if you have not been proven guilty yet, you should have the right, first of all, you should have the right to bail. Secondly, you're past the bail stage, We have laws that provide for probation systems. We have laws that provide for parole systems.
Right.
But in our countries, these systems are very underutilized. We do have departments. We have probation and parole departments. But these systems are often not even invoked. They're understaffed. They have funding issues. Then you see another kind of under trial prisoners, which I think is the vast majority, who cannot even afford their legal representation, who cannot. There's another segment, and I will share a story incident with you too. There are people who cannot afford to pay their fines or to pay their surety bonds so that they can come out of prison.
And that is so, unfortunate, because unfortunately then boils down to the simple fact that poverty as it is, that dictates whether somebody gets justice or not. I'll come back to you, but before that, Dr. Saab, I would want you to add to this further, because I do know that Punjab Prisons is doing this amazing work where it has engaged, students from a private university, giving them a chance to become paralegals and actually give legal representation to those who cannot afford the same. So tell us more about this collaboration, and how effective do you feel are collaborations like these to tackle all these issues which Ms. Ayesha has rightly so listed?
So the legal representation is comes under right to defend,
Right.
and that is one of the essential right of any person who is facing any charges. What we call it under trial prisoners. So it is one of his fundamental right that is not only guaranteed in our constitution but also under international covenant civil and political rights as a treaty obligations. So we understand and we recognize our responsibility being the custodian of the prisoners, which are almost 68,000 prisoners confined in different jails in Punjab. Here we have the first thing which we have done. We requested the high-ups of the bar councils to constitute a committee at district level, and that committee includes the volunteers and qualified legal counsel. They can offer their services to contest their case or to represent them in their respective trial courts.
Right.
This is the one of the steps.
Right.
And the second, we also have in connection with the different NGOs, and we allow them and they interview different prisoners, those who need legal representations, and they are also doing work and they're giving positive results
Right,
as well.
sir. That's great.
And on top of it, we have signed a MOU with the Lump Law School. And this idea came under the, again, United Nations guideline on the legal aid. So why not that idea should be implemented and experimented in Punjab. And we started with the Lump Law School, and purpose is the mature students of the law school, they will visit different jails, and they will teach to the qualified and competent prisoners who will teach to other prisoners. It is sort of a legal awareness, and legal
And who knows,
awareness
they
in,
might be equipped enough to fight their own cases.
yeah, that's a legal awareness in terms of to file their bail application and to file their appeal, and they also to get the counseling, or rather to consult with the legal counsel.
So moving on, another very important issue on which I would want you to shed light is that of a drug addiction. Now we do know that when it comes to drug addicts, we have seen many countries, for example, countries like Portugal, actually recriminalize drug use with the intention of focusing on rehabilitation rather than punishment per se. But when it comes to Pakistan particularly, do you feel that can we or can we not adopt similar models? Do our socio-cultural realities allow us to do so? Because a lot of times we see that when it comes to, tackling drug offenders or anybody who's committed any crime related to drugs, it is more of a social and a moral failing as opposed to, perhaps treating them as mere patients. So how do we go about surpassing this very mindset?
You rightly pointed out, because this is a question of the mindset, and we should not show our hatred towards the person who is abusing any drug, but should be treated as a patient. and they should not be considered to be outcast in the society, but they should be treated and tried to be bring that person into the society.
Right.
And especially when a person in the youth or in school, in the colleges, and it is identified that somebody is using any drug, there's this authorities of the schools, but we say the principal of the colleges or the vice chancellor of the universities should make the standard operating procedures or the policies to avoid the naming and shaming of the person who is charged with the drug offenses, drug abuse.
Right, sir, your point is noted, on which I'll come towards you, Dr. Saab, and I would want you to add to this further. Since we are talking about, prisons and generally the issues that we do face with regards to overcrowding particularly, I think in this regard, sir has made some very valid recommendations that when it comes to curtailing the prison population, this in the larger picture is a responsibility which is then vested with the entire society. But looking at this from your own mental health care perspective, how do you feel can mental health care professionals, how do you feel can educational institutions collectively work to exhibit this responsibility? A lot of times we also come across, young people, more particularly students, who might end up developing criminal tendencies, that too only because of perhaps excessive use of smartphones, or for that matter, even having excessive exposure to violent video games. So how do you propose can all these issues be looked into holistically so as to perhaps reform our children, that too at a young age?
Again, this is a global phenomena. This is a global challenge that is all the world is happening. I think so. There is a growing evidence that smartphones and these tabs have been impacting on the neuronal development of children. Their pathways don't develop naturally. Their need for being stimulated all the time, and we have seen during the last few years more trend of ADHD, autism, complex mental health issues, anxiety, depression in children from very young age. I think so. These video games, this can cause a huge amount of emotional difficulties and psychological difficulties in the children, and they struggle to manage their emotions. They become impulsive. Their need for immediate gratification that
It can also push them into having criminal tendencies.
All these
people who do witness abuse, domestic abuse particularly from an early childhood age, they are more prone to become hardened criminals when they grow up.
Again, I think so. Again, all these have lead to developmental difficulties, personality deficiencies, and sometimes personality disorders, which can lead to again immediate gratification, impulsivity, this lack of taking responsibility. This can all lead to, so the parents, society, everyone needs to be aware. We need to make sure that again we as a society become responsible. Again, mental health needs should be identified from a young age. There should be emphasis in school, and there should be inclusiveness.
Perhaps there should be routine, regular screenings in school so as to have, such people or potential students with criminal tendencies being sifted out, that too at an early stage. I'll come towards you, but before that I would want you to add to this. I think we must also talk about, some of the more initiatives taken by the Chief Minister Maryam Nawaz Sahiba. In this regard, we have seen that when it comes to overall improving women's access to justice, a greater number of women police stations, a greater number of women safety desks, they have been, established. But how do you as a lawyer feel all these initiatives, which are definitely very well intentioned, have they or have they not impacted the Thana culture? Because you see, at the end of the day, it's about, how easy it is for any woman in Pakistan to practically access the police and to get herself heard. So how do you feel are initiatives like these successful in actually bridging that gap?
It's an amazing initiative, and you can actually see that the culture around women actually being able to go to a safe space where they can register their complaints. The culture is coming more in this country because of these women desks in Thanas, because of women police stations where women can go and register their cases like domestic abuse, like harassment or any kind of violence against women, which maybe in the past they did not feel comfortable doing because of like a certain stigma and also the fear of not being taken seriously by men. That being said, I applaud the government for these initiatives. There's another side to this coin that women are often complainants, but they can also be on the other side of the criminal justice system, which is the defendant side, which is
Right.
when they're the accused persons. So that's where I would like to see reform next, because fortunately we have a female chief minister who is very sensitive to women's needs. So after making things easier for female complainants in the criminal justice system, what we need is making things easier for female defendants or female prisoners.
Right.
So as you know, international standards like the Bangkok rules on the treatment of female offenders and also on the non-custodial measures for female offenders, they recommend that states should have some sort of alternatives to incarceration available for women,
Right.
especially when those women also have caregiving responsibilities. And in our society, what women does not have caregiving responsibilities?
And if you see other countries like Norway, I was reading this report which very clearly stated that they even have these programs where they make sure that even when it comes to men generally, and they are put behind bars and they have been convicted as per any other criminal offense, they ensure that their family bonds, they are not broken. They are given a certain time of amount to spend with their children so as to ensure that all those family relationships, they are kept intact. So I think that's a very
Certainly,
valid recommendation. This should equally apply for men as well, not just for women.
Definitely, you're very right. And there are studies that actually show that if you're in regular contact with not only your family, with the outside world, your community, your friends while you're in prison, your chances of reoffending decrease in a huge, significant way. Because you know that you have a family that you're trying to get back to, you will try to be better for them.
On which I'll come towards you, Ms. Sara, and I would want you to add to this further. So we are talking about, the rights of women inmates particularly. In this regard, given the fact that, Women's Day has recently passed, and of course, given the fact that Pakistan is a signatory to CEDAW, how do you as a lawyer propose, can we work towards perhaps better implementing the rights that Pakistani state has to give to all female inmates, be it with regards to improving their access to the legal justice system, or for that matter in this regard, perhaps to improve their access to healthcare system. Overall, how can we better strive towards reintegrating women inmates back into the society? How would you comment on this particular issue?
So women prisoners represent only 1.5% of Pakistan's prison population, but they face a disproportionately severe conditions under incarceration. Pakistan has international obligations under the conventions like CEDAW, and you have a very clear mandate of the minimum standard rules for the treatment of female prisoners called the Bangkok Rules, which basically, focus on the women and their specific needs in prison, such as, their healthcare, mental well-being, legal aid, alternative to incarceration, etc. However, unfortunately, the largest province in Pakistan, Punjab, with the largest prison population, has a chapter on female prisoners that is outdated and does not meet the standards articulated in the Bangkok Rules, and those are minimum standards. The good news is that there is a draft that is available that was done with the consultation of all stakeholders to bring the chapter on the treatment of women prisoners and their children and vulnerable prisoners in line with the UN minimum standards, that is lying with the Cabinet of Punjab, and we hope that that is going to be passed soon, especially under the auspices and under the helm of our first ever woman chief minister.
Right, madam. Dr. Sahab, I want you to add to this further since you have that practical perspective on this. So when we do talk about the strides that we have made, not only with regards to women prisoners, but also perhaps with regards to transgender inmates, with regards to juvenile offenders too, how do you see Pakistani prison system evolving to meet their peculiar needs?
Punjab prisons are doing its utmost effort to protect the rights of vulnerable group of prisoners, especially the women and the juvenile and the transgender, especially in the female prisoners. Just a coincidence, we have the female Chief Justice of Lahore High Court,
Right.
and she has also taken initiative that there should be the separate women jail for the women prisoner at Lahore and Faisalabad and Rawalpindi. And as currently we have only one women jail
Right.
at Multan. So this is one of the initiative that is, under the international guidelines guideline. The
Right.
female
And sir,
should be
it's much
confined.
needed.
Yes, female prisoners should be confined in the female prison
Right,
and
in
supervised
separate
by the
spaces.
female staff.
Right.
Currently, we have the female block in a male prison. So, no, this is the minimum thing which we already was doing, but this is a new initiative of the government that we are going to build a new prison for the confinement of the female prisoner.
So, but when you do talk about other segments, because I would want you to shed light on, transgenders particularly in this regard too. We do know that there was a very landmark Lahore High Court judgment a few years ago, which very categorically said that there needs to be separate jails for transgenders, which is very important for them so as to, protect them from potential harassment. But how do you then propose, can we go about implementing judgments like these and other well-intentioned initiatives of the government itself, ensuring the fact that we don't push such segments into self-isolation as well, because it is, sir, a very fine balance that we need to strike.
Yes, please. The Punjab prisons have taken a very important step, especially you may call it as the administrative step. When a prisoner is admitted inside the jail, we have a register number 1. And this, this is a very famous register, those who have been into the jails,
Right.
that gives you the admission numbers. So under that register, we have already 2 type of the genders, male and the female. Now we had added there's one more column of the transgenders. This is a very important thing, and it means any prisoner who is admitted, any transgender is admitted inside the jail, so he would be identified as a transgender. This is the one major
Right.
thing. The second, we have implemented the relevant section of
Transgender
the
Protection Act 2018.
2018, that when a prisoner is inside, transgender is inside the jail, he must be properly segregated from the other prison population. And whenever he is entitled to work with the prisoner, so this his gender need must be respected.
Right. And sir, these are very important things. Also, from the viewpoint of creating public awareness, a lot of times people don't even know that, transgenders have these very important fundamental rights. I'll come towards you, Dr. Saab, and I would want you to add to this further. Since we are talking about the issues here, I feel it's very important to talk about the solutions equally as well. When we do talk about the importance of reintegrating, prisoners who have been into the jail back into the society, here mental health care professionals like yourself, here families of that respective individual and the community have an extremely important role to play. So what are the changes which you as a mental health care professional feel that we need to make as a society when it comes to better accepting such people, that too without shame, that too without any kind of a stigma?
Again, I think so we should promote non-judgmental approach by everyone, and again we should be helping and supporting people, and inclusiveness and compassion is part of any society, and this is to promote anyone who is vulnerable or who has committed crimes. So this helps them to promote recovery and move them away from the crime. Again, this is a global issue. Again, I think so across the world, especially in UK, people who have been marginalized or who unfortunately have been in prison services, they struggle to find employment, they struggle to find reasonable housing, because again, no one would be able to give them housing. And again,
They struggle to take loans.
Again, everything, loans, and again, it's and they don't have friendship, and they're pushed back to the same crime culture or behavior which they have. So they end up reoffending and getting back into prison, and it is very hard. And as a society, although there is some practical support available, but the society's support is lacking globally, and a lot of work needs to be done
In this regard, so as to help them better reintegrate back into the society. It's just not about, I think, reintegration, it's also about overall reducing the crime rate, because if they are reintegrating, then overall the crime rate of the society, that reduces too. I'll come towards you, Ayesha. I think here we must also talk about other international models like that of UK particularly, which has been using private prisons since the 1990s so as to ease the state's burden. Do you feel that a country like Pakistan can follow lead in this regard? Because we have seen that in sectors more than one, more particularly in the case of education, public-private partnerships, they've completely redefined the contours of, the positive changes and the reform that we've actually brought in these sectors. So why can we not have, by way of analogy, more of such partnerships when it comes to reforming the prison system in the country?
So what this means is there are really grave ramifications of privatizing prisons, because then prisoners are not people. They become commodities, they become something to profit off of for the corporate owner, for whatever the private business that owns that prison is. So it's seen that in jurisdictions like the United States, where prisons are privatized, these private groups that own the prisons, they lobby with the government for harsher sentencing laws, for imprisoning more people, because more prisoners for them then means increased profits. And another issue in private prisons would be monitoring. In Pakistan, we have an amazing, excellent statutory body, the National Commission for Human Rights, that goes to prisons and monitors the living conditions of prisons and prisoners, which then leads to constantly improving conditions. But in private prisons, that is not possible. That's why they're notorious for abuse. We have had clients from multiple jurisdictions, particularly in South Asia and Southeast Asia. I've personally been to some prisons in other countries. And in this region, let me tell you, this is something that I'm actually proud of, because Pakistan's prisons are far from the worst. The most important thing that we have is there's a will, there's this drive in our administration to make things better.
Right, Ms. Ayesha, on which I would want you to add to further, because sir, in this regard we do understand the fact that Punjab police has engaged TEFTA, it has been working with TEFTA so as to overall provide inmates better vocational training program facilities too. So isn't that something that we could aspire to do in a larger capacity so as to reform individuals?
Yeah, sure. Punjab prison has adopted twofold strategy to impart technical and formal training to the prisoners. First, we have engaged the government agencies which are dealing with the technical education, and especially the TEFTA and the government education department, which are imparting education and training to the prisoner. Recently, we have signed a memorandum of understanding with the TEFTA, and TEFTA is teaching in 15 jails in Punjab, and it is a very successful program.
Right, and not only that, sir, we've seen private programs like that of Pakistan Furniture Council as well, which has been working on the vocational training of prisoners. So I think to the extent that it actually helps prisoners reintegrate back into the society, perhaps getting some involvement of the private sector, that would be beneficial, sir.
Yeah, sure. But we are already getting the benefit of such sort of the NGOs which are well reputed, and they have a very professional and dedicated approach, and they are focusing on the reformation, the reintegration of the prisoners. And in different jails we have allowed different NGOs to run their schools, especially for the juveniles, and they also have established schools for the females.
Sir, but moving towards the end of the show, my last question to you would be that we have seen that different countries have had different approaches when it comes to sentencing overall, whereas we do appreciate that countries like Norway and Germany, they have generally tilted towards having a more of a rehabilitative sentencing, community service based model. We also see that countries like the US, they might have a combination of both community service as well as giving prisoners punitive punishments. But when it comes to Pakistan, what do you feel would be the ideal model that we as Pakistanis need to follow given our socio-cultural dynamics?
So in context of Pakistan, Pakistan is a federation, and the United States of America is also a federation. And keeping in view the socio-economic factors or the dynamics of Pakistan, so there's a mixed model, the rehabilitation and also the security-based model is applicable, must be replicated in Pakistan.
Right.
We have to keep the balance between the right of the prisoner as well as the right of the society.
Right, sir. Not only that, but in addition to this, I think it's very important that when it comes to the more vulnerable segments of the Pakistani society, be it women, be it juvenile offenders, or even transgenders for that matter, perhaps a greater leap towards giving them community service sentences, that is something that should be definitely prioritized.
Yes, obviously, we know government of Pakistan implemented this Juvenile Justice System Act 2018 that is purely talking about the treatment of the juvenile prisoners. And this legislation was under the treaty obligation of Pakistan under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. So under this law, it is the obligation of the government, the juvenile must not be sent to the jail, and during the police custody he should be in the observation home, and when it under the judicial remand he should not be sent, or she should not be sent to the prison,
Right.
but should be in the rehabilitation centers.
Right.
And one very salient feature of this legislation was the concept of diversion, that is a form of community service, or also it talks about the restorative justice.
Right.
So it was a very good addition.
Right, it's a very
to the
progressive law in this regard, but sir, it needs to be implemented then in letter and spirit, especially with regards to having separate rehabilitation facilities for the juvenile offenders. I'll come towards you, sir, and moving towards the end of the show. What role do you feel can advancements in technology, what role do you feel can AI have when it comes to overall working towards and acquiring rehabilitative outcomes? We have come across countries who have actually used AI so as to very intelligently engage in predictive analysis, and this is something which would give them that edge of making the person who's committing the crime feel that, you know, what would be the feelings of the victim, so that they feel guilty about it. And it's a very intelligent way to look at it. Do you feel that, you know, we do need to look at this more so from an AI perspective as well? Like, what are the mental health interventions that we would need in this regard so as to perhaps better engage and better reform criminals?
I think so. We have to, as the technology is advancing, we have to make sure use of all the technology. AI can be particularly used for screening prisoners for their mental health needs, so we can able to identify people who are much more vulnerable for depression, anxiety, psychotic illness, or neurodevelopmental disorders. So this would allow us to have a very targeted approach towards them and have so then we can provide them with effective care. Again, especially psychological wise, you're talking about complex psychology. I would have doubts about that, because again, it's a very complex, because victim empathy, although AI can do that, but a trained psychologist would be much more able to understand, because victim empathy, violence reduction, it's a very complex psychological and emotional thing. Although AI has gone through that, but interpersonal context in that is really important. And their group work, where they work in a group setting to reduce the violence and reduce, to reflect on their past behavior, is really helpful, because
Right.
interpersonal element
But sir,
is
then
really
AI can also be used for that purpose as well, to instill those feelings of regret, of remorse, and that is something that is very important, because when we are talking about the prison system, it's just not about looking at the conditions, it's also about looking at the mindset of the defendant and the accused. So that has a lot to do with this. But yes, sir, I do appreciate your point. Coming towards you, Ms. Ayesha, and moving towards the end of the show, I think what is very important to talk in this regard is also the rights of those Pakistani prisoners who might have completed their sentences in various other countries and would have returned to Pakistan. So how do you feel can we work towards reintegrating that strata of Pakistani prisoners? And in this regard, I was also reading this report which suggested that, you know, Pakistan and Malaysia particularly are all set to sign an international prisoner exchange treaty which allows Pakistani prisoners in Malaysia to serve the remainder of their sentences in Pakistan. So do you feel that, you know, international treaties like these, they would be more helpful when it comes to overall improving, you know, conditions for Pakistani prisoners? A lot of times they wouldn't just want to stay in that country, they would want to come back and, you know, serve the remaining sentence here.
Certainly, certainly. I'm so glad you asked this question, because just last year I was in Malaysia and we were pushing for this agreement to be passed, because there's a huge number of Pakistani nationals that were imprisoned there, and we were visiting them in prisons. And I interviewed about 11 Pakistanis that are in Malaysian prisons. And this is not specific to Malaysia. Any Pakistani in any overseas prison would say the same thing. But the first thing they would say, we just want to go back in our country among our people. Be it in prison, we would at least know that we're surrounded by our own community. So the good thing is that Pakistan already has 11 prisoner transfer agreements with 11 countries, under which the government is allowed to make a request for that country for repatriation of any Pakistani national that has been convicted in that state. And then that Pakistani national is then allowed to come back to Pakistan and serve the remainder of their sentence here. the biggest advantage of that is that that person is now among his own community and he's near his family.
Right, and it gives them a better chance to rehabilitate and reintegrate
Definitely.
into the
Like we were
Pakistani
talking
society.
earlier,
Yes.
being near family and having contact with outside world, having community support is like one of the biggest things you can do to rehabilitate a person. Recently, 56 Pakistani nationals have been repatriated from Sri Lankan jails back to Pakistan. They're currently at Adiala jail and their cases going on before the Islamabad High Court. So what we need now, these people after coming back to their own countries, we need a specific mechanism for their sentences to be adjusted according to Pakistani laws. Pakistani laws which are much more lenient and more humane, more human rights based than some of these other countries.
And perhaps better fitted to our social-cultural dynamics that way too.
Exactly, to
Right,
our
Ayesha. Coming towards you, Sarah, and before we conclude today's show, so my last question to you would be, generally we have spoken at length about, different kinds of prisoners, be it women, be it transgenders, be it for that matter even juvenile offenders. But when it comes to particularly addressing the rights and needs of mentally ill prisoners, in this regard, we do note that the Supreme Court of Pakistan has passed a landmark judgment emphasizing upon the rights of the same, saying that the execution of prisoners who are mentally ill and those with mental disabilities will not be allowed. When it comes to practically implementing judgments like these, what strides have been made, what more is it that we need to do, and generally when it comes to accepting such prisoners back into the society, what are the societal attitudes that we as a society proactively need to change?
So, despite the Safiya Banu landmark ruling, there hasn't been enough meaningful implementation of the ruling. The ruling prohibited the execution of prisoners with severe mental illness. It also required that, executing a severely mentally ill prisoner who has no idea about his punishment would violate his human rights. It also mandated forensic mental health assessments at the time of arrest and throughout the judicial process, but also called for the transfer of mentally ill prisoners to psychiatric facilities rather than housing them in prison. It required for an overhaul of our laws, especially the laws that pertain, updating our laws that pertain to the treatment of mentally ill prisoners in the criminal justice system. But unfortunately, we don't see a lot of that in play as yet. So there have been some attempts to draft a law to update the criminal procedure rules and the other rules that apply. So at Justice Project Pakistan, we've been at the forefront of advocating for these reforms. We've always highlighted the critical gaps in the system. We've got clients such as Kaniza Bibi that are still languishing at mental health institutions, not being eligible for release because the procedure is unclear, the system of evaluation is unclear, and the oversight mechanism hardly exists. So we hope that outdated regulatory frameworks like the 1978 Punjab prison rules and the Criminal Procedure Code, etc., incorporate the directions given by the bench in Safiya Banu, and that the executive pays due attention to the very practical directions that were given by the bench in Safiya Banu.
Right, Ms. Sarah, your point is noted. On which note I would like to conclude today's show. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, Roxab. Thank you so much, Ms. Ayesha. And thank you so much, Ms. Sarah, for your time today. Well, to conclude today's show, we generally spoke about the evolving status of prisons as they do exist in Pakistan. In this regard, we not only spoke about the realities which do exist therein, but also the challenges which Pakistani prisons are then faced with. If we are serious in reforming Pakistan's prisons, then issues that we do need to very proactively prioritize is to do away with the issue of overcrowding, to do away with the issue of lack of legal representation, that too particularly for the more vulnerable inmates, be it women prisoners, be it juvenile offenders, and overall also by that yardstick to prioritize rehabilitation. Overall, Pakistan's prison system needs to be revamped and overhauled so as to then work towards actually having rehabilitative outcomes rather than merely prioritizing punitive punishment. That's it for tonight. Until next time, take care and Allah Hafiz.